Aloha friends and neighbors, Rollin Frost here, show 530 coming at you, Astrology, Ancient Science in the Modern World. Last week I was talking about how many planets, how many bodies to include in your chart. I want to qualify it because there's exceptions to all the rules. And let's suppose we're talking about Vesta, the goddess of the fireplace, an asteroid, and that perhaps if you examined the positions at least once of these bodies, if you picked up one that was on the angle or was very elevated in your chart in some way, suppose you had Vesta on the midheaven right up at the top of the chart, well, you might go into the fireplace business and open up the best shop in your area where people could go and get all kinds of different fireplaces, and you would have a very strong Vesta in your chart, you see. So there's exceptions to the rule. Maybe you'd have Vesta over here on the 7th house and you'd marry her if she was, and she'd be right there in your face all the time if she was opposing your rising sign. So it's possible that some of these minor bodies we were talking about, some of the people in the supermarket, some ordinarily not part of the family types, could be very strong in an individual chart because they're positioned on an angle or somehow empowered in the chart. So there's always exceptions. So I want to talk today about the USA chart more, and I want to get right to it because I'm going to start you on the process of understanding that the USA chart is Gemini rising, Mercury is the ruler, and Pluto opposes Mercury. And we're going to talk about Pluto. So come on, let's go. Now there is a lot more to this information I'm about to give you than meets the eye, like a lot of other things. It runs deep here, so I want to give you a little basic background to the whole thing first. Now, nobody really knew the exact time of birth of the USA chart. When they finish signing the Declaration of Independence and it's done and this is our document, there's this moment of birth, and that's what everybody's looking for, yeah? So just like a person chart, you get that birth time down to the minute and you get the exact rising sign, oh boy, can you do predictions. Everything clicks in, including the past. So the first thing I really did in trying to go after this problem was, if you don't know the time, what you do is you work backwards. And I went to the folks. I had one very smart astrologer lady, had a closet full of all these files, and what she came up with was 8 degrees Gemini or 8 degrees of Sagittarius. Then there were the Rosicrucians, who some years back in the 20s or so had a bunch of really good astrologers, and they went over the history of the U.S. and looked for these sensitive things, and they came up with 8 degrees of Sag, 8 degrees of Gemini. So there's been a lot of folks talking about these two. Now, most of the people, it just hasn't gone very far because a lot of astrologers have said, okay, it's got to be Sagittarius because we're so rich. And nobody really wants the country to be a Gemini rising because they're known to be kind of changeable and tricky at times. And 100 years ago, you couldn't get a job if you told people you were a Gemini. They thought all Geminis were thieves. Anyway, so the Sag rising chart, now that winds up setting this thing for about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So I knew 8 Gemini, 8 Sag was important. Next thing, I got to know Ben Franklin, and Benjamin Franklin was there, yeah? The noise outside on the street and from my neighborhood is incredible. Anyway, now, if I was Ben Franklin, and the more I read Ben, the more I realized, man, that guy, he knew enough about astrology, know how important the rising sign was. Now, the lifestyle of the people who were doing this is important. If you're looking for a chart like this at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it was hot as hell there. This is July. And these people, they had siestas. They drank a couple of quarts of beer for their lunch, went home, took a nap, came back at 4 or 5 o'clock. That's what Ben talked about, the way life was in the printing press factory where all the boys drank all that beer, and they go home, snooze, they'd come back 4 or 5 o'clock, work again till 8 or 9, 10. A lot of business was done late at night, and it was cool. So 2 o'clock in the afternoon did not seem like a good time for this. Now, the thing that really set me against this Sagittarius rising chart was the fact that Ben was there, and I knew he was watching. And he knew what was going on in the sky, because for 30 years he had published an ephemeris. He knew the moon was in Pisces and that it was trining Jupiter and Venus. There's a beautiful moon in Pisces trining Venus, Jupiter, and the sun. What a wonderful thing in the sky. And Ben knew this. Of course, Ben didn't know about Uranus, and he didn't know about Pluto. He didn't know about Neptune, but he knew these other planets. Now, Ben was also plenty smart enough to know that if you birthed something at this time over here in the 8th house, and you put the goody-goody planets, Venus, Jupiter, and the sun, in the 8th, this is other people's money. This is the bankers. This is, no. What you want is you want to make a person rich or a company rich. You put the goody planets in the 2nd house of money here, where Venus, Jupiter, and the sun are in your money house. So Ben Franklin, he wouldn't have gone for the 2 o'clock in the afternoon. No, he'd have been looking for this chart to make the country rich. And indeed, if he'd have gone, if it had happened instead of 2:03 a.m., if it had been just a little bit earlier, he'd have had Taurus rising, and Venus would have been the ruler of the country in the 2nd house of money, conjunct Jupiter, trining the moon. A gorgeous, beautiful chart. Ben must have been looking for that. If he knew that it switched over and went into Gemini rising, he would not have been happy. I don't know if he did or not. I don't know if he was calculating that fine. But I know he wouldn't have gone for the Sag rising chart. No way. And it wasn't the lifestyle of the people. So now I'm in this zone of 8 degrees of Gemini rising. What happened? 9/11. And on 9/11, I had the kind of experience, the United States had an experience, we all did, that allows you, it's like a person who wrecks the car and spends a year in the hospital. Boy, we can go back and figure that out and go figure the person's birth time. What happened? Well, the progressed moon, at the 8 Gemini chart was very close to the rising sign. The progressed midheaven was over here opposing in the house of enemies, which is exactly what you'd expect. Oh, poor me! The progressed moon's on the body of the chart. The progressed midheaven says, we have an enemy, we have an enemy. Okay, so 9/11 allowed me to pin down the time of the chart. And it turned out that it was a little bit off 8 Gemini. I got 5.5 Gemini. Now the reason for that is that Uranus is at 8 Gemini, almost 9 Gemini, really. 9 Gemini, and Uranus, some really important planet right on the rising sign of the U.S. It's independence, freedom, our individuality. It's what America is known for, because Aquarius is on the cusp of the 10th. This angle, this is what's important for a country. And we've got Aquarius on the 10th house, which means Uranus is the ruler of the 10th, which means this is the ruling planet of the chart of our country. Yes, the democracy, this land of freedom. And that's what this Uranus Aquarian age thing is all about. And it comes in at 9 degrees. Hence, that's why everybody's picking this up, because this planet represents the real trauma. In a way, the Twin Towers, were in fact